Sharren, thank you for joining us at Hub Dialogues.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
If you'll indulge me, I want to start with a question about you because you've had a fascinating personal journey from being born in Toronto to serving in the IDF to veterinarian nursing in Australia to ultimately becoming a member of the Knesset and now Israel's deputy foreign minister. Can you tell us a bit about that path and what drew you into politics?
Wow. Um, well, um, for me, it was, you know, I didn't really think throughout, mm, my life before that would actually end up in politics. My dream was to come back from Australia back home to Israel and build this incredible wildlife farm in the Negev, in the desert, that will
Yeah.
rescue wildlife. It's very similar to what I used to do in Australia. I volunteered in an NGO that rescues wildlife, including, like reptiles and possums and parrots, like cockatoos
Yes.
and lorikeets and things like that. And that was my dream. Um, but when I came back to Israel, going through university as well, and we went through an economical difficulty, especially for the younger generation.
Yes.
Israel is a very much socialist based economy throughout since its foundation. And for me, as a capitalist, as a very much liberal, classic liberal from an economical perspective, I felt like that voice was not heard. And I realized with some of my friends who became more and more active together with me in politics that if we don't go out as the younger generation to represent ourselves, to push these ideas, to make sure that we are the one who are making that change, it will never happen.
Yes.
And that's why I joined politics, and some good friends have pushed me to the front where I wasn't sure, I actually fit there. But it was an incredible journey. And now it's been 10 years, 10 years since August, the beginning of August, that I've been in parliament serving as one of the most liberal Knesset members in Israel. I've actually won this award numerous times through the New Liberal movement here in Israel.
Yes.
Because of my perspective about civilian rights and economical rights.
Well, you went precisely where I was going to go next, which is you've described yourself in the past as, quote, politically homeless. And as you say, as a classical liberal that finds herself working inside a broad and often fractious coalition. What does that mean in practice? How do you reconcile your own liberal commitments with the demand of coalition politics in Israel?
So it's been very difficult. And I think the most difficult part was the last 6 months. And that's when I felt truly homeless. My party joined the Likud party. So I've started at the Likud party and we
Yes.
broke off from the Likud party to try and change the government and to change the leadership from the right wing side of the map. It's been 3 years of a very dramatic ride with probably like 6 different elections to 7 different elections, including primaries, within those 3 years. And now that my parties have rejoined the Likud party, I decided not to step back in. I felt like my point of views, I cannot push these ideas through the Likud party, and that is why I feel homeless. I'm very right wing, very hawkish on security issues. I was a combat soldier. It really opened my mind and shaped my view on security views and what is happening in the Middle East. And at the same time, I'm a fighter for civilian rights, for liberty, individual liberties, and economical liberties, reduction of taxes, less government involvements. And it is very difficult because I think that the vast majority of Israelis are still stuck in this very socialist perspective. And we keep on pushing there, and that's what's keep on creating more and more difficulties.
Mm.
And so I right now, once they've joined in, I feel a little bit politically homeless. And I think that many people in Israel feel like that on the right wing side of the map here in Israel. Um, but it's up to us, I think, especially the younger generation in Israel, to make that change and to make sure that our voice is heard and very, very loud.
Uh, uh, that will resonate a great deal with our audience, particularly our younger listeners and viewers. But notwithstanding those laudable goals, of course, there's to some extent had to be a reshaping of priorities in the aftermath of October 7th.
Mhm.
To what extent have you and your colleagues across the government had to subordinate or delay other policy goals in order to focus squarely on the country's national security?
Wow. You know, talking about the economy and individual rights, speaking about whether it's medical cannabis or anything else, feels like so much of a privilege.
Yes.
We're not there. We're in somewhat of a survival mode, where there's major things that needs to happen to make sure that our security and deterrence is brought back
Yes.
here to Israel. We live in a very tough neighborhood, very tough neighborhood. We just are fighting now since the 7th of October for the last for the last 2 years, a six-front military war against six different entities from our region. Um, and not many countries had to face such a threat, a serious existential threat.
Yes.
The 7th of October created also a major failure in the deterrence of what we were able to build for almost 80 years. And the day after the war, many people are concentrating on what's going to happen with Gaza. We need to concentrate here internally in Israel on two major things. One, to bring back the deterrence, to investigate in depth the failure of the 7th of October, to make sure this never, ever happen again, to change our tactics, military tactics perspective, because the conception of the security guidance or policy was wrong. It failed us. And we need to do a reshuffle in making sure that we are rewriting our security policy and how we react to certain situation in our region. The other thing, so this is a major security issue that we have to concentrate and rebuild. The other thing is an internal tear among the Israeli society where it's very polarized. I know this is something that is happening all around the world, including Canada, the United States, Europe, so many countries. The left and the right have become so personal. It's not about ideology. It's not about facts. It's not about, sensible policies. It's about a person.
Yes.
It's very, very personal, and that has been polarizing, not just, in America, in France, in the UK, or anywhere else, also in Israel. And this is something that the day after, we have to find a way to heal that and to bring people closer and to let those two extremes, they can be as vocal as they want, but we need to find the centrist voice that will be louder than those two extremists.
Um, we will come to a conversation about some of these post-war questions domestically and geopolitically in a moment. But before we do, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you how you would characterize the current state of the war. And from Israel's perspective, how do you think about the core objectives at this point?
So look, we thought that after the operation in Iran, there will be a clear path towards a deal. a ceasefire that will bring back the hostages and will alleviate also the situation in Gaza as well. That's why we've said 3 times yes to the Witkoff proposal that was set on the table.
Yes.
And 3 times Hamas rejected it and said no. Even on the last one, where they went quite a few steps towards Hamas's demand, and Israel still said yes, and Hamas still said no, we still decided to send a delegation to Doha because we thought there would be enough pressure for them to um, to try and make some concessions, and we thought that we will be able to make some concessions to bridge that gap. Unfortunately, since day one of the negotiations, and this is so sensitive, and it's such a sensitive time, and Hamas is with its eyes and ears open to the media, to the international media, to everything that's happening. And during that very sensitive time, almost every week there was a different declaration coming from Europe,
And
mainly
Canada.
Macron, Canada, Australia, that was putting pressure on Israel and are backing Hamas. And Hamas saw that and they went on their high horse
Of
and
course.
kept on demanding more and more and more and more. And we reached that point where they realized that the longer they prolong the war, the more they will be rewarded, the better it is for them. And that's why those negotiations exploded and failed. Um, and so once they've published the images of Aviatar and Rome, who have been held captive in Gaza for almost 2 years now, in the most harshest conditions you can imagine. You can see how they're being starved,
Nasty.
abused, tortured, mentally, physically, sexually. Anything you can imagine is happening to them. We understand we cannot waste any more time. We got to go and get them. And the only way to get them is military pressure and military operation that will finish Hamas. And that's what we're doing right now. These are our aims. This is where our eyes are set on. And I think it was the right decision by the prime minister. I completely support it, and I back the government with this decision. And I hope that we set that really quickly, to make sure that we can put this war behind us once the hostages are back and once we are able to disarm Hamas.
You mentioned evidence of declining support for the war in different Western countries, including Canada. What do you think explains the erosion of solidarity, and to what extent are you and members of the government mindful of it?
Wow. Where do I start? Um, I have to start, I've always been so proud of my Canadian background and, you know, uh, as a country who's so tolerant and accepting and safe. I think Canada was one of the safest place for Jews.
Yes.
I would never in my life, not me or anyone in the Jewish community, would ever imagine what a threat Jews would be under in Canada. And if you ask me what had happened, I would tell you that it would be the same reason of why hundreds of IRGC operatives fled from Iran during the war into Canada. It is becoming more and more safe haven for those kinds of operations, for those kinds of terrorist organization, of radical organizations that are pushing extremism and radicalizing the youth, and they have a free hand to operate there. And the government is not really doing anything and not setting the red lines. I mean, think about it. Jewish schools were shot at. A
Yes.
school bus of a Jewish school that is meant to be picking up children was set on fire. A woman was stabbed in broad daylight. What needs to happen more to shake that for the government, for the prosecution, for the law enforcement to start act? Do they need to have a full lynch in a synagogue for them to wake up? Do they need to see blood on the street? I truly don't understand. Where is the Canada that I knew? And I'm really worried. I'm really worried because unfortunately, a lot of that acceptance have brought in people who do not want to assimilate to what Canada is and what it means and the values and what makes this country great. And they are changing it to, and they have imported the problems from the Middle East and from failing countries into Canada. And that is what they are spreading instead of assimilating and absorbing what had made Canada so great until now. And that had become very political. And it didn't just change the spirit and, you know, the culture and the actions of what is happening. It changed political patterns, voting patterns, and obviously that's influencing decision makers. I'm a politician. I know how it goes. You know, they need to vote for you if that is your public that is voting for you. You know, you need to speak a lot in their voices. So I understand some of their need to keep their seats, but I completely disagree with the fact that you need to sell your values, your integrity, standing on the right side of history for that. I won't do that.
Yeah. I would just say in parentheses that it reflects a deeper problem that I think the country is only starting to reckon with. And it speaks to a point you made earlier, which is Canadian foreign policy not projecting Canadian interests and values, but increasingly being responsive to diaspora politics, I think, at the harm of Canada's reputation around the world. And indeed, it's something that we need to confront. Another issue that we have to confront, it seems to me, is the problem of incomplete information or outright misinformation. Hamas, as you set out earlier, has refused to surrender at several points. Polling suggests many Gazans actually don't want Hamas to surrender. And yet, much of this complexity doesn't make its way into Western coverage.
Mhm.
How does Israel overcome these informational barriers, not just with hostile audiences, but even with open-minded citizens who find themselves confused or skeptical about what they're hearing concerning the ongoing war?
Well, I think that unfortunately, um, the world is changing and you can get less and less the full picture of what is happening through the mainstream media.
Yes.
There's a lot of political agenda and many information and it's being hidden from us, from the public, through the mainstream media. Um, and I think that what is happening is a reaction to what had become as a politicization of the international organizations as well.
Yes.
So what is happening is that many of these radical groups, okay, are using the international institutions, the international law courts and justice system as a political tool in their campaign, in their agenda. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, the mainstream media and many reporters are failing to investigate in depth the fact they're not waiting. Someone spreads something, it's about the clicks and how
Yeah.
many views you'll get. and how viral you'll become. And it doesn't matter anymore your integrity and there used to be reporters who that was the most important thing. If you make a mistake, your career is destroyed. But you see now reporters who are lying, know they're lying, publishing fake images knowingly, and they don't care because they get 100 likes, 1,000 likes on social media. And that's so irresponsible. And I think that the fact that many in the public might not have critical thinking anymore, people are being taught to listen to the emotion, not to look on the facts. I think that had deteriorated that as well. We understand we live in a different world today. Much of the war is being run. One of the front line is not just the military, but it is a publicity one,
Yeah.
a very much public one. There isn't a way I can describe a war in a pretty way. There isn't such a thing. War is an ugly thing. It's a terrible thing. I saw things I never wish anyone ever would see, not even my enemies. Um, that's why we try to avoid it. Israel never wanted a war. Israel wants peace. Israel have made huge concessions, land concessions, personal concessions, just to have stability and peace. But unfortunately, in many cases, the other side doesn't see things the same way. And the 7th of October was a proof of that.
Yes.
But what they're fighting is not a territorial war. It is a religious war. It is a cultural war. That's the base of it. If you don't get it, you do not get the Middle East. And once you do understand that, then your eyes open to what has been happening, not just in the Middle East, but through the rest of the world as well. This jihad war towards radical Islamist world dominancy, led by two main entities. One is the IRGC, Iran. The other one is the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar, Turkey. Okay. They have been radicalizing the youth. They're not using just terrorist organization, weapons, military, but media. Al Jazeera is the mouthpiece for the Muslim Brotherhood. They've been spreading lies, propaganda, inciting the youth, making them extremists. Look, even the Palestinian Authority have banned Al Jazeera because they said they are radicalizing their youth. It is banned in many countries in the Middle East because of that. Yet it is one of the most popular channels and social media channels, in so many other parts of the world, including Western democracies. And they are spreading lies, complete fabrications. And people actually take them as a source, a serious source. Um, they are not afraid of lying. They're not afraid of putting out propaganda. And I think that not enough people understand that they are serving as a tool for radical jihadists. This is including major mainstream channels, reporters that in many cases just don't understand it. And in many cases, they're just on that political side.
Well, in that vein, talk a bit more about your role at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. How are you working to address these political and informational challenges in key capitals like
Mm,
Washington, Ottawa, Brussels, and elsewhere? What does that effort look like day to day?
wow. Well, first of all, as much interviews as I can.
Hmm.
Maybe before that, how does my day look? Beside politics, I'm a mother of three babies.
Hmm.
My eldest one is 4 years old, and my twins are 3 years old.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I start with my first shift at about sometimes even like 5 a.m. With a baby, set them up, send them to school, and then I start my second shift, which is doing as many interviews as possible to foreign media and foreign outlets, meetings, briefings, meeting official people, working on diplomacy, and making more and more bridges and contacts with other authorities and other governments all around the world. I'm trying to build different projects. I try and concentrate a lot on the Christian world. As someone, descendant of, Jews who survived so many atrocities, who were persecuted and thrown out of their countries, of their homeland, whether it was in Europe or Morocco or Iraq or Iran or anywhere else. We feel and we understand what the Christian community is experiencing all around the world. In Africa, in the Middle East, where right now they are a persecuted minority.
Yes.
Churches who stood the test of time are being burned. And I think that we need to stand together during difficult times. And so I've been working really hard on trying to build those bridges with Christian religious leaders, to see how we can cooperate and work together. I go a lot to Africa. I just came back from South Sudan, from Nigeria.
Hmm.
Nigeria is experiencing a terrible, terrible Christian persecution. I think the average now is that every day there are 30 Christians who are being murdered in Nigeria. They have terrorist organization, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, more Boko Haram, ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas. They're all operating there. The idea is the same idea. And seeing a true massacre on a massive scale happening there, where women are being raped, people are being burnt alive in their churches, you know, my heart goes out to them. And there's not a word from mainstream media about those things. In a way, I feel bad and terrible. And South Sudan is the same issue. The war in Sudan have created one of the worst humanitarian crises you can imagine. You see their women abandoning dead children who look like skeletons on the side of the road. 25 million people have been displaced and affected by that. People are really dying of starvation, hundreds of them every single day. And the world is completely silent about it. And for me, we understand that. We understand when the world is turning their back on you. We understand that we have to stand together in solidarity to defeat that evil. And so a lot of my day is going around meeting Christian leaders, up front through social media or like in Zoom or any other means, creating different projects. We're bringing now Christian leaders from Africa to make a big convention in Israel, to talk about it, to talk about our mutual history. It's going, we have an ancient history from the biblical time together.
Right.
We have a great relationship. We've assisted throughout the years since the foundation of Israel to many countries to gain their independency, to defend themselves. And so for me, it's part of a mission of maybe it was Golda Meir, our first female prime minister, a great passion. And I feel like,
Hmm.
maybe even I give a little bit more, for that dream to continue to develop and extend as well. Um, and then after it, I go back to my girls. I put them to sleep. I have probably between 2 hours to an hour and a half to spend with them. And then, like now, after they go to bed, I go and I do more interviews and I make more meetings. Sometimes I get on Australia at 2 a.m. and things like that, and the day keeps on going. But I'm not complaining.
Well,
I
we're,
hope.
we're grateful that you've shared your time with you. Because you've been generous with your time, I just have a couple more questions to put to you. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask directly about Canada's decision to recognize Palestinian statehood. What is wrong with that approach in your mind? And what are the consequences, both for the conflict itself and for Israel's relationship with Canada and the other countries that have followed suit?
Wow. The first thing for me, it was heartbreaking because that actually backed Hamas during the most sensitive time when we were a step away from reaching a ceasefire. And those declarations and backing them and announcing that they're considering and then declaring that they're doing it, that obliterated our chance of bringing our hostages back home alive. They blew it up and was on the most personal level, such a disappointed, so much pain. Um, the other thing, besides just the support for a terrorist organization to continue to abuse not just Israel, the hostages, but the Palestinians themselves. If you want peace, if you want ceasefire, then you need to pressure Hamas. Israel already agreed to it. It's Hamas that kept on refusing, and that made me furious. Furious. I think that beside the result of that, I think that it was such a shame of destroying years and years of, very professional diplomacy and, people who were working together for so many years in regards to that. And they've just obliterated that. They just thrown that into the bin. Look, in reality, it won't mean anything, but it means that the more Canada pushes for a unilateral, one sided approach that cannot exist in the current situation, it pushes Israelis to do one sided steps and unilateral steps as well. So if you think you're bringing people closer, it's the exact opposite. You're drifting them far more apart, and you're making what you think is best something that will never be able to happen. Beside that, it just proved to me that the people who are right now in leadership in regards to foreign policy have no clue about the Middle East and what is happening around here. Look, would you have any conditions for a state? Are you willing to hand it out to a terrorist organization to abuse, to persecute Christians, to eliminate any other minorities, for a terrorist organization to govern it, to have a corrupt government? What are your conditions? None. This is fine. An ISIS state straight on 300 meters from my three little babies. That's okay with you? Because that's the reality. The Palestinian Authority is a corrupt dictatorship who has promoted terrorists. If you demand tomorrow elections in those territories, Hamas will get into power because the vast majorities
Yes,
of Palestinians support Hamas.
yes,
And so you are handing out an independent state to Hamas. And if I know how that will affect my three little babies, oh no, oh no. So when I say there's zero understanding of the situation in Israel, you know what? I say, you know what? Come here, learn a little bit more, open your eyes to this reality. And unfortunately, And I say that with the biggest pain you can imagine because I truly love Canada. My my dad lives there. I go and visit very often. I have so many friends. I truly love Canada. But I can see, and mark my words, in 10 years from now, you will need to face many challenges that we are facing right now with terrorist organization. And I say it with the gravest heart and the biggest pain, because the last thing I want to see in Canada is some of those patterns, those atrocities that will happen in Canada and have already started.
Let me. That's such a powerful answer, and one I know that will resonate a great deal with our audience. Let's wrap up on a forward-looking note. As you think about your role as Deputy Foreign Minister, what does success look like for you? How will we know when we eventually look back on this period that you've made a difference for your country and for your three babies, as you put it?
What will be a success? A success will be that the radical jihadist forces who have turned the Middle East into one of the worst chaotic regions will be eliminated. And whether it's people in Israel, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Iran, will be free to live their life as they see them fit. That women will be liberated and will be able to make their own choices, not to be at the threat of torture and rape just because they didn't wear a veil or a hair scarf. Um, I know it's a dream, but that's my aspiration. A true success, a true win will mean to see Afghan women, Iranian women, Lebanese women, Pakistani women able to live their life, make their own choices, and be safe.
That's a great point to wrap up our conversation on. Sharren Haskel, the Deputy Foreign Minister for Israel, thank you so much for joining us at Hub Dialogues.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure.
This video has been brought to you by Airbnb. Thank you, Airbnb, for sponsoring the Hub's YouTube channel this month. The housing crisis, as the Hub's listeners and viewers know, is real, and Canada needs to act. Some think that action should be regulating short-term rentals like Airbnb, but the closer you look, the clearer it gets that that's not the answer. Attempts to stifle rents by regulating platforms like Airbnb have failed around the world. Take New York City, for example, where I live, which is experiencing record high rents a year after ending short-term rental regulation. In Canada, Airbnb accounts for just 0.6% of Canada's housing stock, but contributes over $10.8 billion in estimated visitor spending to the country's economy. Airbnb isn't taking homes off the market. It's putting resources on the table that the government can put towards investing in real solutions. To learn more, visit airbnb.ca/closer look. And thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Hub Dialogues.